When the client's lawyer showed up at 1:30 p.m., I was drinking coffee in the cafe downstairs. My manager, Brad, had ordered me to shut down the only terminal linked to their $5 million product launch 2 hours earlier. No explanation. Just shut it down and leave. I'm Howard Callahan, 52 years old, 25 years with this company, and I did exactly what he asked. Twice confirmed, fully documented. Now he was about to learn what that cost. But let me back up to how we got here. It was barely 11 that morning when I saw Brad's shadow through the frosted glass of my cubicle. He had that clipped walk he only used when he was about to throw his weight around. He didn't bother with good mornings, just stopped at my desk and said it flat. Shut down your workstation and leave. No context, no reason, just an order. My terminal wasn't just a terminal, it was the only machine directly linked to our biggest client's live feed. A secure connection streaming real-time product data, coordinating distribution for a launch that had been 6 months in the works. I looked up at him. His jaw was tight, like he was daring me to challenge him. "You heard me?" he added. "Do you want me to log out of the monitoring software or actually power down the system?" He rolled his eyes. "Don't play games. Full shutdown. Now." I could have asked why. Could have reminded him the COO had been checking in daily on this project. But 25 years had taught me that reasoning with guys like Brad was pointless. He'd made up his mind before he walked over. Brad Palmer, 35 years old, MBA from a top school, 5 years of corporate experience, none of it technical. He'd been my manager for 8 months, and in that time, he'd made it clear he thought everything built before he arrived was obsolete. So I just nodded, turned back to my screen, and started the shutdown sequence. The secure console flickered through its warnings, disconnecting live stream, terminating processes, severing data feed. Each confirmation prompt sat there, waiting. It took less than 60 seconds to pull the plug on 6 months of work. The screen went black. The fan wound down to silence. I logged the action in the system audit. Client feed terminated per manager instruction. No commentary, just a fact that would stay there forever. "Leave your badge on the desk," Brad said. I took it off and set it down. "Am I coming back?" He smirked. "We'll see. Take the rest of the day. I'll handle things from here." He didn't wait for me to pack up, just turned and walked toward the elevator. I watched him go, already turning over what he'd just done. Brad had never liked that I was the only one trusted with the live feed. I'd built the system from scratch when the client signed with us back in 2018. A secure connection nobody else in the department knew how to maintain. I'd documented everything. Written procedures, security protocols, escalation paths, but the COO insisted the live feed stay in my control for security reasons. The terminal was configured with encryption keys that couldn't just be copied somewhere else. Disconnect improperly, and the client servers would reject any attempt to reconnect. Brad called it territorial. I called it keeping a $5 million contract from collapsing. I'd sent him the documentation twice. He'd skimmed the first page and tossed it aside. "You IT people love to make things sound harder than they are," he'd said. Except it wasn't harder than it needed to be. It was exactly as complicated as necessary to keep a $5 million contract safe from careless decisions. I took my time gathering my things. My phone buzzed with Slack messages, random chatter about lunch plans. Out of habit, I checked the feed status on my phone. Offline. Completely dark. Brad wouldn't notice the difference right away. He'd head to lunch, probably brag to someone about finally taking control. But I knew exactly what would happen next. The client had a major product launch in 2 hours. Their marketing campaign was synchronized with the live feed. Their distributors were standing by for green light signals only the system could send. Every minute offline was a minute closer to chaos. I walked past reception. "Heading out early?" she asked. "Something like that." The elevator doors closed behind me. For a moment, I thought about going home and letting things play out. But the truth was, I wanted to see it. I wanted to be there when Brad's decision hit the fan in real time. So instead of heading for the street, I went down 1 floor to the small cafe overlooking the lobby, ordered a coffee, sat by the window with a perfect view of our office entrance. 25 minutes later, Brad came back from lunch, tie loose, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. He looked relaxed, like a man who thought he'd just made a big power move. He didn't see them at first. The client rep in her tailored navy suit, the COO standing beside her, both faces tight with urgency. They were waiting for him right in front of the reception desk. I couldn't hear the words from the cafe, but I didn't need to. I saw the COO lean in, voice sharp. I saw Brad freeze mid-step. The coffee in his hand wobbled, and I just sat there, sipping mine, knowing this was only the first crack in what was about to be a very public collapse. From my spot, I watched Brad's expression shift, started with confusion. Then the first flicker of realization. The COO wasn't just stopping by for a chat. The client rep leaned in, gestures sharp, phone in her hand like evidence. Brad's mouth moved. He held his hands out, trying to look cooperative while he stalled for time. The COO's reply was short, his posture stiff, eyes locked on Brad's face. Then he turned toward the elevators. Brad hesitated, then followed. The client rep trailed behind. I didn't have to guess where they were going. The server room was on the same floor as my old desk. I stirred my coffee slowly. This was going to be a long afternoon. By the time I went back upstairs, the energy had shifted. You can feel it when something's wrong. Conversations dropped to a murmur. People glanced toward closed doors. 2 junior analysts were huddled near the printer. One spotted me. "Hey, I thought you left." "Grabbed coffee," I said. "What's going on?" They exchanged a look. "The feed's down," one whispered. "The client's here. Brad's in the server room with the COO, and they don't look happy." I gave a small nod. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw Brad pacing. The COO stood by the table, phone to his ear, hand tapping against his leg in a steady rhythm. The client rep sat stiffly, arms crossed, gaze fixed on Brad like she was trying to bore a hole through him. For months, I'd been warning Brad the live feed was fragile in the lead-up to launch. Not because the system was unstable, it wasn't, but because it relied on specific security protocols. The terminal was configured with encryption keys that couldn't just be copied somewhere else, disconnect improperly, and the client servers would reject any attempt to reconnect. It was designed that way on purpose. Security over convenience. I'd sent him the documentation twice. Both times he'd waved it off. The conference room door opened. The COO stepped out, expression unreadable. He walked straight past my desk toward the CEO's office. That was bad. Really bad. Brad came out a few seconds later, face flushed, tie slightly askew. He spotted me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Finishing my coffee. I motioned toward the cup on my desk. "You were told to leave. I was told to shut down the terminal. I did what you asked." His jaw tightened. "You could have warned me." I kept my voice level. "Brad, I confirmed the order twice. You didn't want explanations." He didn't answer, just turned and walked back toward his office. By mid-afternoon, the whispers had spread. People were checking their phones, probably reading client emails about the launch delay. The junior analysts were pulling up older backups, trying to find a workaround, but I knew it wouldn't work. The system wasn't designed to be patched together in an emergency. That was the point. We'd built it with strict security in mind, any deviation, and it shut down rather than risk data corruption. And here's the thing about high-profile launches. They're like dominoes. One piece falls, everything else follows. Marketing campaigns stall, distribution freezes, contracts start bleeding penalty clauses. I kept my head down, answering unrelated emails, acting like I wasn't listening when snippets of the disaster drifted over the cubicle walls. Around 4, I saw the client rep leave. She didn't shake Brad's hand, didn't even look at him. The COO escorted her to the lobby, posture rigid. Brad stayed in his office, blinds drawn. I sat there, letting the weight of the day settle. I hadn't engineered any of this. Hadn't pulled a stunt or sabotaged anything. I'd simply followed an order, and now the consequences were piling up on Brad's desk. The thing about moments like this is they reveal something. A good leader takes responsibility. A bad one looks for someone to blame. And I had a feeling tomorrow Brad would try to make this my fault. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying the scene. The COO's face tightening, Brad's coffee hand wobbling, fast-forwarding to what I knew was coming next. When I walked in the next morning, the shift was impossible to miss. People weren't making eye contact. Conversation stopped when I got close. On my desk, a single printed sheet waited. Meeting at 9 a.m. Conference Room B. Attendees, Bradley P., Howard C., HR, COO. No subject line, which told me everything. At 8:59, I walked into the room. Patricia Drummond from HR was already there, notebook open. The The COO sat at the far end, phone face down, expression like stone. Brad leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the backrest, trying to look relaxed. "Howard," he said, giving me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's go over what happened yesterday." I sat down, placed my notebook on the table. "Of course." Brad leaned forward. "The live feed went down right before a major client launch. This caused significant disruption and reputational damage. Now, as I understand it, you were the last person to operate the terminal before it went offline." The COO's gaze stayed on me. "That's correct," I said. "I shut it down per your direct instruction at approximately 11:04 yesterday. The action was logged in the system audit." Brad shifted. "You could have told me it was linked to the client's feed. Instead, you just did it." I met his eyes. "Brad, I confirmed the order twice. The second time I asked if you wanted me to terminate the connection. You said yes. You didn't ask for an explanation, and you've told me before to avoid overcomplicating things." The COO's head tilted slightly. "Did you know the shutdown would sever the client's launch feed?" "Yes," I said. "And I also knew it couldn't be reconnected without reauthentication, which requires compliance approval. That's why I asked for confirmation twice." Brad laughed lightly, shaking his head. "He's framing it like I just signed off on tanking the launch. That's not what happened. I didn't look away. The audit log contains the exact text. Client feed terminated per manager instruction. Time-stamped, immutable." The COO turned toward Brad. "Is that accurate?" Brad hesitated. "It may be how it appears, but I didn't know what I was authorizing. And yet you authorized it," the COO said. Patricia wrote something down. The meeting wrapped after 30 more minutes of circling. Brad insisting he wasn't told. Me repeating I'd confirmed twice. The COO asking variations of the same question. Why give the order at all? When we left, Brad brushed past me in the hallway. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he muttered. I stopped walking. "Enjoying watching the company lose a $5 million contract? No. But I am enjoying having documentation." He froze for just a second before continuing down the hall. By lunch, word had spread. I could feel eyes on me in the break room. The COO's office door stayed shut most of the afternoon. Brad's blinds were drawn again. Around 3, an email from HR landed. "Please prepare any documentation, correspondence, or notes relevant to yesterday's events. Forward directly to me before 10 tomorrow morning." That was the moment I knew Brad's situation was worse than he realized. HR doesn't put things like that in writing unless they're building a case, and I had plenty to give them. I opened a folder on my personal drive. Every email where Brad dismissed my concerns. Every meeting note where he'd waved away security protocols. Screenshots of messages where he'd bragged about streamlining by cutting corners. All time-stamped, all archived. I didn't need to manipulate anything. The truth was enough. By the time I shut down for the day, I had a neat file ready to send. A factual record of how we'd gotten here. Brad thought yesterday had been the crisis. He hadn't realized yet it was just the first crack. I woke before my alarm, got to the office 10 minutes early. The floor was quiet. That particular don't make noise quiet. At 8:07, the COO sent a calendar invite. 9:30, emergency, client status and next steps. Attendees, CEO, COO, HR, legal, IT lead, Howard, Brad, legal. That told me the temperature. At 8:22, HR replied to my document submission. Received. Thank you for the thoroughness. No softening, just acknowledgement. At 9:27, I walked into the big conference room. The CEO stood at the head with a printout. The COO sat to his right, jaw set. Patricia had lined up 3 pens next to her legal pad. Neil Carver, our IT lead, was already plugged into the projector. Brad took the seat at the far end. The CEO didn't bother with greetings. The client's counsel formally notified us at 8:51 that they're invoking the penalty clause for launch disruption. They're also reserving the right to terminate for cause. He looked around. $5 million in annual revenue at risk, plus penalties. A stillness moved through the room. The COO nodded at Neil. Show the sequence. Neil brought up the audit trail, scrolled past routine entries. Then the line sat there in 14-point font. 11:04:17. Client live feed terminated per manager instruction. The CEO didn't raise his voice. Explain why that instruction was given. All eyes slid to Brad. He cleared his throat. We were consolidating control of key systems. The terminal was owned by one employee. That's not scalable. It was the only terminal authenticated to the client's live feed, the COO said. The re-authentication window is measured in days, not hours, by design. Removing it inside launch week isn't consolidation. It's negligence. Brad's chin lifted. I was not informed that shutting down the machine would sever the live feed. If I had been warned, I kept my voice even. Yesterday at 11:02, I asked if you wanted a full shutdown or just a session logout. You said full shutdown now. I asked again if you wanted me to terminate the live connection. You said don't play games. Neil clicked to the cross-reference. My terminal log, Slack timestamps. Brad's calendar entry labeled Ops Cleanup. The timings nested together. Legal spoke for the first time. Mr. Callahan, did you make any discretionary decisions beyond the instruction? No, I said. I executed the command I was given and documented it. Did you withhold information that would have prevented the instruction? I asked for confirmation twice, I said. Mr. Palmer has repeatedly directed me not to overcomplicate explanations. I kept my language simple. I also sent him the security protocol summary last week. I slid a printed copy forward. Patricia took it. The COO didn't move, just watched Brad. Brad leaned toward the table, palms up. Look, the core issue is single-point failure. We can fix that by distributing access. After the fact, the COO said. Yesterday, you removed the only authenticated point during a critical window. The CEO set his printout down. We're not debating architecture. We're dealing with consequences. We have a client threatening termination, penalties accruing, and a system that cannot reconnect without a compliance cycle. He turned to me. How long to restore if we prioritize? I didn't answer right away. Pictured the steps, the signatures, the dance with the client security officer. If the client cooperates immediately, best case 48 hours, realistically 72. There are external approvals we don't control. The CEO's jaw tightened. Brad tried to wedge himself back in. Howard can accelerate it. He's done it before. I met the CEO's eyes. I can coordinate and execute, but it requires the process we agreed with the client. No shortcuts. The room held its breath. The CEO nodded once. Understood. He turned to Patricia. We'll address accountability separately. Right now, we need to limit damage. The meeting broke into tasking. Neil would prep the staging environment. Legal would triage the penalty language. The COO would call the client's COO. Brad remained seated, staring at the table. When the room thinned, he followed me into the hallway. Help me out here, he said softly. You know I didn't mean to crater the launch. Say I misunderstood you. Say anything that takes the edge off. I kept my voice calm. Brad, I'm not your edge. What I am is the person who told you for 3 months that these controls weren't optional. You called it territorial. He swallowed. Your tone doesn't help you. My tone didn't shut down the feed. He leaned closer. If you hang me out to dry, you'll get a reputation here. I blinked once. I have a reputation. Here. I do my job, I document, and I make sure systems stay up. He stared at me a second longer, then gave a tight smile. Careful, he said, and walked away. At 11:15, the COO asked me to join a call with the client team. Their security officer sounded tired but professional. We stepped through the recovery plan line by line. We'll prioritize approvals, their officer said. But we're documenting root cause. Send your internal audit in the instruction chain. The COO glanced at me. I nodded. You'll have everything within the hour, he said. We ended the call with timelines nobody liked but everyone could live with. Thank you, the COO said to me. Not warm, not cold, just real. Back at my desk, I packaged the logs, the Slack confirmations, the security summary I'd sent last week. Facts lined up in a row. At 12:42, the CEO's assistant put a 30-minute block on my calendar. 3 p.m., follow-up and accountability. Brad was on the invite, Patricia too. I saved my work and looked out across the office. From Brad's office, the blinds were open again. He was on the phone, gesturing with a pen. Spin in progress. At 2:59, I was outside the conference room door. Low voices inside, careful words. I opened the door. Brad was already seated, back straight, hands folded. Patricia had 2 folders this time. The CEO looked up. We're going to set the record, he said. The room felt lighter somehow. Howard, the CEO said, you shut down the live feed terminal yesterday at 11:04, correct? Yes. Per Brad's direct instruction, I confirmed twice. The action and confirmation are in the logs I sent to legal. Patricia flipped open the folder to a printed copy of the audit trail. The CEO turned to Brad. Did you give that instruction? Brad inhaled. I gave an instruction to clean up. I believed we were logging out of a session. I was not informed that the system design would... Did you give the instruction? The CEO repeated. To shut down the workstation. Brad's eyes flicked to Patricia, then back. Yes. A beat. Nobody moved. We'll let legal finish their interviews, the CEO said. But based on the documentation, the external impact, and the client's current posture, we're placing you on paid administrative leave effective immediately pending the outcome. Brad blinked twice. Leave? I should be part of the remediation. The remediation is proceeding, the COO said. You won't be part of it. Patricia closed the folder. Your network access will be suspended at 3:30. Please remain available for further questions. Security will accompany you to collect personal items. Brad's mouth opened, then closed. This is political. You're making me the headline so the client has a villain. The CEO didn't flinch. We're acknowledging a decision and containing a problem. He glanced at me. The recovery plan? I opened my notebook. Staging handshake passed at 2:26. We'll receive the client's auth token by 4:15 if their security officer hits her window. Our validation hash is ready. If all goes clean, we can move to controlled reconnect at 5:30, monitoring for 2 hours before we widen scope. Best case then? The COO asked. We'll get status pings green for a subset today. Full throughput tomorrow after the second approval. Marketing will need to reschedule the public push. Ops can resume quietly tonight. Nobody cheered. Real life doesn't do triumphant music. Do what you need, the CEO said. Brad's chair squeaked as he stood. He didn't look at me when he left. He looked past me. The door shut. The COO turned to me. You'll lead the restore. You'll also propose a revised access model that prevents single-point operator and single-point manager failure. He let that hang. We'll fund it. That was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get. I nodded. I'll send the draft by end of week. The CEO gathered his papers. There's one more item. We're offering a retention bonus for carrying the recovery and a title adjustment. Principal Systems Architect, effective today, if you want it. I watch my pen roll a half-inch and stop. Principal Architect, words that fit like solid shoes. Titles don't erase what happened yesterday, but they do change who gets to say no next time. I'll accept, I said. He nodded once. Good. They left me there with the table and the hum. At 3:28, I returned to my desk. Security arrived 2 minutes later. They stopped at Brad's door. A few heads lifted, then dropped. I opened the secure console. The staging link waited, blinking. The client's token came through at 4:11. I messaged Neil, then dialed into the bridge. Voices checked in one after another. Ops ready, security ready, client monitoring ready, systems ready. We ran the sequence aloud like pilots at a cockpit. Not because we didn't know it, but because saying it out loud makes people careful. At 5:34, the first green indicators returned. At 5:41, a second cluster lit up. At 6:02, the client security officer said, "We're seeing stable flow on our end." She didn't sound relieved exactly. She sounded like someone who'd just made it back to shore. "Hold at current scope," I said. "We'll widen at 7 if the logs stay clean." The COO unmuted just long enough to say thank you. Then he went quiet again, listening. At 7:06, we widened. Nothing spiked. Nothing sagged. The lights kept stacking green. The room around me, still half full of people who'd stayed because they understood that payroll and launches mean rent and pride, started breathing normal again. At 8:12, we ended the call. No speech, no victory lap. Just a list of follow-ups and a second bridge scheduled for 7 a.m. I shut my laptop and sat back. Across the aisle, someone exhaled and laughed once. The kind that releases exactly the air it needs to. Outside, the night air had that iron taste it gets before rain. I stood on the curb, a moment, phone in my pocket, city noise around me. My reflection in the window looked like a person who'd done their job. The next morning, the client's COO sent a 2-line email. Appreciate the speed and clarity. We'll suspend termination while we review. Continue with the revised access plan. No praise, no absolution. Just oxygen. I forwarded it to the team. Then I opened a new document and titled it Access and Accountability Model V1. Started writing the section headings I'd had in my head for weeks, long before yesterday tried to make a point with a sledgehammer. At 9:03, an unfamiliar name pinged my inbox. An HR business partner from another division. Congrats on the new role. When you come up for air, I'd like to talk about cross-training your approach to our other teams. I smiled just enough to feel it. The building hummed, the green lights held. Systems don't care who's liked, they care who's careful. People get paid or they don't. Launches happen or they don't. You can manage by posture or you can manage by process. But only one of those survives contact with the real world. And 25 years of doing things the right way finally had the last word.